Contented Media presents Dr. Bitcoin, the man who wasn't Satoshi Nakamoto, an original podcast series with Mark Hunter and Arthur Van Pelt.
Hello and welcome to Dr. Bitcoin, the man who wasn't Satoshi Nakamoto, and a quick update to the COPA versus Wright case, which, having been on the back burner for a few weeks, looks set to take centre stage once again. With me to go over the latest developments in the case is my comrade in arms, Arthur Van Pelt. Arthur, it's been a while. How are you?
Yeah, I'm fine, Mark. I'm actually pretty fine. Looking at all the turmoil going on lately again, I thought I was sort of free of, and I noticed with myself that I was slowly floating away from the whole Craig Wright story, but this is all not over yet. We're still having to deal with an appeal, and there are new cases coming and things, and yeah, and great stuff. So I'm back on the edge of my chair, so to say.
You're never free. No one can be. Once you're in this, you can't be free of this forever. He just finds a way to drag you back in, doesn't he?
Yeah, he absolutely does.
So what we're going to cover today, for those that don't know, or listeners that may not know, I'm sure most people are aware, but some may not be, there was a hearing that took place in London yesterday. We didn't really know much about this in the lead up to it. Nothing was filed really until I think late on Wednesday. We found out there was going to be a hearing on the Friday, but we still didn't know too much about it. And as always happens, drip, 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 we found out as we went it was going to be a contempt of court hearing plus other things. Now, we knew that COPA had started or were considering starting contempt of court proceedings against Craig Wright. But again, this is all done behind the scenes, so we find out at the last minute. So we weren't entirely sure what was going to happen yesterday, but what did happen yesterday, we thought it was worth just giving our listeners a little bit of an overview of what happened, and more importantly, what could happen in the weeks and the months to come. So the hearing yesterday primarily was concerned with the COPA case, but the genesis of the contempt of court order and the genesis of the hearing was Craig Wright's new Champagne case. Now, we're not going to go into detail over the Champagne case more than we have to. If you want to listen to more about the Champagne case, there are much more impressionable individuals who've covered it in more detail. So, go and find them and seek them out. But we will have a more detailed episode covering the appeal of the COPA ruling, which this also concerned, in the coming weeks. So there's a kind of a couple of things that are sort of meshing together here. We'll try and separate them out as best we can. So in July, Craig Wright was served with an injunction which prevented him from litigating on the fact that he was Satoshi and the fact he created Bitcoin, and he had to pop that notice on his various social media channels. I'm not Satoshi, I've forged evidence and blah, blah, blah. On the 9th of August, Craig Wright filed for permission to appeal. On the 10th of October, he filed the Champagne case. And then as a result of that Champagne case, as we all thought at the time would happen, 8 days later, COPA started contempt of court proceedings against Craig Wright. So Arthur, can you just give us a very brief overview of what the grounds were for COPA's contempt of court argument?
He is indeed, again, it's not even hinting. He's even, just an example that pops up in my mind, he is saying, for example, that Satoshi created the white paper, but it was Craig Wright who posted the white paper online. But yeah, if Craig Wright is saying that he posted it online back in the 2008-2009 era, well, we all know that it was Satoshi posting it and putting it online, then he is putting himself in the shoes of Satoshi Nakamoto.
Yeah. So there's 2 counts of him allegedly breaching the injunction by referring to himself as Satoshi Nakamoto in a legal filing, which he's not allowed to do. And there's a 3rd case that COPA cites, which is where someone, Craig Wright, or as he would say, the person running his old Twitter account, took down the injunction notice, which is where he says he's not Satoshi, the judge found this, the judge found that. COPA says that was taken down too early before the expiry date, which is a kind of a technicality, and I think that's less serious than the first two, but all three together are quite tasty. So that was COPA's argument. That's what they brought to the court. Craig Wright denied that the champagne passing off case contained any contemptible action, which led us to yesterday's hearing. Now, one thing we do need to define as far as the champagne passing off case goes is who Wright has categorised as the defendants. Arthur, I think if you can just give us a brief overview of who Craig is filing this this case against, it might give us an idea of his likelihood of success here.
Yeah, this is a crazy stunt. But at first, the first filings that he did in this champagne passing off case was that he just called it BTC Core plus Square Up, which is one of the parties that he said is connected to BTC Core. Well, BTC Core is a name, a label that he came up with himself. It doesn't exist in the real world, so it's a fictional name for what Craig Wright claims is a sort of partnership between everything that is into Bitcoin. Development, exchanges, infrastructure builders, and 122 parties. I mean, it's
just incredible.
Amazing. It's amazing for that reason alone. But he is indicating and suggesting that there is a massive conspiracy going on between those parties.
They're all in a WhatsApp group together, conspiring against him.
Well, yes, yes, something like that. Crazy. I mean, the first name on that list is, for example, Blockstream.
Well, that's not a surprise, is it?
No, of course not. Then there is also Chaincode Labs. There is MRT Digital Currency Initiative. There is Square, of course. There is MicroStrategy. Yes, MicroStrategy. BlackRock. There's Coinbase. There's Gemini. There's BitMEX. There's BTCC. There's OKCoin. And no, I'm already past the 10. So, and a bit later there will also be Circle and Kraken and Xapo. And I mean, everything. And everybody who is a little bit involved with Bitcoin in some way or another, he tried to put on that list, and he still, like I said, he still forgot several. But of course, the Bitcoin developers are back on this list again, so they are still not free of everything.
Yeah.
At least that is if Craig gets it his way when this lawsuit is going through. But we'll have to see about that.
Mm-hmm. So, on to the hearing yesterday, we're going to use the excellent thread from BitMEX Research as the basis for this. So please forgive us if we jump around and skip over a few bits and go back in time, because we're following the thread as things played out. So there were two issues to deal with yesterday. The first was this champagne passing off case, and Square Up, which I'm not quite sure why it's been separated out, but it helps. So Square Up wanted to halt the champagne case until the contempt of court application had been heard, because obviously if COPA found Craig Wright to be in contempt of court, then that champagne case could not proceed, because that's the method by which he was in contempt. So one has to follow the other. So the first thing on those lines was to decide whether the champagne passing off case would be halted until the contempt was dealt with. Essentially, Justice Miller agreed, and it seems that Craig Wright didn't have a big issue with that particularly. But Arthur, the real interest, as far as we were concerned, was the contempt of court issue. And Craig Wright actually said, if I am found to be in contempt of court, I will amend the champagne case so I'm no longer in contempt of court. But you don't get to do that. You don't get to file something which you know runs a risk of you being in contempt of court. And when it's found out, when it's picked up, you go, okay, I'll change it then. It's like someone stealing a bag of jewellery and giving it back and thinking they get away with it. It doesn't happen that way, does it? No,
that's not what I expect, indeed.
That was what he's trying to do, but I mean, I think Justice Miller was like, no, it doesn't work that way. If you're in contempt, you get punished for it, and then the next case will be kicked out. So they were then discussing when the contempt of court hearing takes place. There was some toing and froing on the dates, and it was agreed upon that the contempt of court hearing was going to be set for the 18th and the 19th of December. Now, the interesting thing there was Craig Wright going to attend? Because obviously he's wherever he is in Asia. It turned out he was in Singapore. He said he was in Singapore, dialing in remotely to the court, and the demand for him to be there was all based on whether he was going to be cross-examined. Because if the facts were just going to be laid out for Justice Mellor to rule on, then Craig Wright didn't need to attend. He could have done it remotely, and the ruling would have been done once the facts have been given over. But COPA was arguing that Craig Wright would need to be cross-examined. And then Justice Mellor said, are you saying that cross-examination would need Craig Wright to be there in person? And that was the most interesting part, because, I mean, it's pretty clear why he skipped the country pretty soon after the ruling earlier this year. And it's pretty obvious, isn't it, Arthur, why he doesn't want to come back into the country?
That is for me quite clear, yeah. He is probably rather afraid of taken into custody and with a police car going to jail at some point.
Yeah. There was a really funny point. Again, when these Twitter threads are put out, you're never quite sure what's been quoted and what's been summarized, but you can tell sometimes when something has been quoted because of how specific it is. And there's a great quote from Jonathan Hoff saying, "This is an extremely serious judicial proceeding, therefore we think it should take place in person. Craig Wright has brought a very large claim. If there's any merit in COPA's application, it's wrong in principle to hide behind a keyboard from a closet in Thailand." I thought that was a fantastic line.
Yeah, it was brilliant, because that is actually what we have seen in the past few months. At first he was, for weeks, maybe even a few months, he was rather quiet. We didn't hear about him. At some point he started posting videos again, lecturing lectures about, I don't know, for philosophy and law, indeed, yeah. And in more recent weeks and months, he is now starting to post on Twitter again quite a lot under his account Takamoto, whatever, CS Takamoto or something. And we now know that it is him, and he doesn't hide that anymore. But also private information that he has been on the sea in a boat or canoe or something, and one of those hilarious moments was indeed that he posted something from that was in the early days. Indeed, a small closet within the background. You could see the hooks and things from. I was like, oh my God, this is not an official desk where he is sitting or something. He is indeed, oh my God, it was so hilarious.
To go from a 7-bedroom mansion in Surrey to a wardrobe in Thailand is fantastic.
And now the lawyers mentioning it in the court, brilliant.
I know. On a more serious note, actually, Jonathan Hoff did reference what we were just saying. He said, the final point we make on this is that Craig Wright is seeking to evade the consequences of his actions. He may want to avoid the police or avoid detention. Now, that's pretty much what we were just saying, and we'll come on to the sort of ramifications of that in a second. But what then happened is that Craig Wright then had to put his case for why he shouldn't be called back. COPA's argument for why he should have to give evidence in person at this December hearing was pretty straightforward. Like, it's a contempt of court charge. It's a very serious charge. And if he loses that, then that could mean incarceration. So there's got to be very, very good reasons why you would allow someone to do this remotely, knowing what the action sort of could be. Now, before we discuss the next bit, this is the first time that Craig Wright's been representing himself in court. We've seen how he did it with his filings, and again, when we cover the COPA appeal in more detail in a few weeks' time, we'll just see exactly how bad his decision was to do that. But this was the first sort of hints that we got of what we can look forward to in Craig Wright represents himself. Now, some of his arguments as to why he shouldn't have to be dragged back into the UK to face his consequences of his actions was that he was going to be in Singapore at the time of the hearing, And he said it was absolutely fine for him to give testimony from there. And conversely, having to sit in a courtroom is different. He basically threatened, I might have a meltdown and might not be cognitively able. In my own environment, I'm much better. I'm very high on the autism scale. I don't work well with people, do not have other people here. I should respond without being interrupted and without people in the background, blah, blah, blah. But he testified for what, a week in total in the COPA case, sitting next to Justice Mellor. So how can you possibly say, oh, I might have a meltdown, I might do bad things, when the judge you're speaking to has literally been in the same room with you while you've been giving evidence for a week, and none of it ever happened?
That is a bit of a lame excuse, and of course Craig is not only saying that he is about the autism thing. He's also saying that he wants to see his family.
Yeah, well, that was the next one. He said it will be very difficult for me to be in England away from my family over Christmas. I very rarely see my children, and they'll be in Singapore around this time. This is what happens if you're going to try and effectively steal billions and billions and hundreds of billions of pounds from people. Then it comes at a cost, whether you succeed or you fail. And if you fail and you decide to skip the country and then still file these lawsuits from a different jurisdiction, then unfortunately the consequences are this sort of thing. So you can't say, oh yeah, I want all this money, I want to sue these people, I want to have my day in court, but I miss my kids. If it's that desperate, bring them over, or don't do this in the first place.
Nee, but that's exactly what the judge responded at that moment. He says, yeah, Mr. Wright, I understand what you're saying, but I think you underestimate the seriousness of a contempt application. And then he says, yeah, I know how serious this is. And then the judge replied, excuse me, the person accused of contempt needs to be present in court in all other cases. What I'm minded to do is defer a decision on this point until we have seen your further evidence. And I understand that you want to see your family, but there are flights daily to Singapore. Yeah, and then Craig says, yeah, but I do not want to be in court being jet-lagged. Well, you could come over a few days before, so the judge always replies to him.
Honestly.
But it means that we can expect with, I think, 99% certainty that the 18 and the 19, which were the dates that were finally agreed upon for this contempt hearing. It was not decided during this session, but I'm quite sure that it will be decided that the 18 and the 19 will be the dates that the contempt hearing will take place, and Craig Wright most certainly will have to attend.
The fact that he's sitting there, I mean, virtually, but by all intents and purposes, sitting there saying he can't possibly attend a contempt of court hearing because he might be jet-lagged. Like, that is the most stupid. That's the kind of thing that your lawyers would say, do not say that. Do not even try to say that. Yeah. And yet, this is the kind of stuff he's coming up with. It was, I think I tweeted this, it was the most shameless way of trying to avoid feeling the consequences of your actions I think I've ever seen. Like, you don't get it both ways. If you want to do this, you've got to put up with certain things. It was just crazy that he tried those arguments. And the thing is, I mean, let's say this hearing takes place and Justice Mellor rules from the bench and says, yeah, okay, you're guilty of contempt of court. What can they do if he's remote? It's not like he's going to be giving testimony under an armed guard, and then if he's found guilty, he's arrested. There's nothing they can do, because someone else said, well, what if he's found guilty, but then doesn't come back? It's one of these things where you can take it stage by stage by stage, but essentially, if he keeps defying everything all the way, there will be a default judgment against him, and then he can't set foot in the UK without being arrested. So if he takes his denials and his refusals to comply to the end game, that means he can never come back into the UK. Now, of course, he may never want to do that anymore. He may have moved his entire life over there, which he's escaping justice, but that's still not a great conclusion to your effort to claim all these hundreds of millions of pounds, having a judgment against you. And it may be that he's prevented from doing certain other things, maybe other countries he can't go to either. You live the rest of your life knowing there are certain things you're prohibited from doing because of the decisions that you've made. So it would be, I'm with you. I can see him ending up doing it in person, and we'll come to a couple more details in a second, but I don't see how he can testify in his defence remotely when it's something that could result in a custodial sentence. It just doesn't work for me.
No, that's why I said I think he will have to show up.
So what's happening now is that there's going to be, that the next thing they discussed was Craig Wright's evidence for why he shouldn't have to attend in person. So he said he has obtained evidence. He's obtained a further report on his autism from another expert, because Justice Miller said, as you said, Arthur, he said, well, I've sat next to you and watched you give evidence. You were absolutely fine. What's the problem? He said he's got new evidence from another expert, and he's got other evidence as well in other areas that all come together to suggest why he should be allowed to give remote evidence. That's all going to come together on the 26th of November, where Craig can remotely dial in, and all the evidence from both sides will be put to Justice Miller, and he'll decide, probably on the day, I'd imagine, whether Craig Wright has to attend that December hearing in person or not. So the Champagne passing off case is stayed. Craig Wright will hand over all his evidence on the contempt, including his additional ASD evidence, on November the 26th. There'll be the hearing. Again, sadly, I don't think it's going to be remotely viewable, so we'll have to rely on tweets. And Justice Miller will rule whether Craig Wright has to be there in person ahead of this 2-day hearing on December the 18th and 19th. Now, as for what could happen, if Craig is found not guilty of contempt of court, then the Champagne passing off case is unstayed and goes to the next stage. If he is found guilty of contempt of court, what he could be facing is up to 2 years in prison and an unlimited fine. Arthur, he's been up for contempt of court before with the Peter McCormack case, which he got out of by supplying, if you remember, reams and reams, thousands of pages of evidence from other cases where the contempt wasn't granted, and the CPS basically said, yeah, we're not going to fight this, off you go. Yeah. But it seems to me this is the closest he has come yet to a potential prison sentence, isn't it?
Yeah, for the period that he is cosplaying as Satoshi, yes. But we do know about another case where he was in fact convicted and sentenced at first to jail time. And that was in Australia. That is now 20 years ago, 2004, 5, 6 era, where he was sued by a guy called Ryan. To cut a long story short, it was ending also in a contempt sentence for 28 days in jail, because it was not super duper big. But he got away with it by doing social services, by refurbishing computers for a church.
So that's what's happening in December. We will, of course, cover these 2 days when they take place. And if you want to be among the first people to hear this, and all future episodes, in fact, you can do so by becoming a member of the Dr. Bitcoin Supporters Club, and you can see the show notes for details on how to sign up and how to do that. Arthur, we'll leave that there for now. I'll speak to you again in a week or two's time when we go through the COPA appeal that Craig Wright filed. And without giving too much away, that is quite a spectacular document, isn't it?
Yep. Say that again.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun one to cover. So, thank you so much for being with me to cover this short review of yesterday's hearing. And yeah, I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Yes, sir. See you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Dr. Bitcoin, the man who wasn't Satoshi Nakamoto. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice to get these episodes the moment they drop. And if you enjoyed what you heard, we'd really appreciate a star rating and even a review to help us get this out to as many people as possible. Our monthly bonus episodes are available to download from our website for a small consideration. And if you'd like to access all these bonus episodes, plus these monthly updates a few days early and other goodies, you can do so by becoming a Dr. Bitcoin supporter. See the details in the show notes for information on how to do this, or head to our website, drbitcoinpod.com. That's drbitcoinpod.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at Dr. Bitcoin Pod, and you can email us at drbitcoinpod@gmail.com. That's drbitcoinpod@gmail.com. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll speak to you again soon.
You've been listening to Dr. Bitcoin, the man who wasn't Satoshi Nakamoto. Written by Mark Hunter, with additional material by Arthur Van Pelt. Editing and production by Mark Hunter. This has been a Contented Media production.